Oi, oi. It's your boy, the Logan Paul of Joe Rogan, but tall, Jack Slack, and it's the Jack Slack podcast, the JSP. We're coming at you on Wednesday the 14th, and we're going to be, if you like bollocks, fill your boots, mate, because there's plenty of bollocks this week, and we're going to be bollocking all about it. Because honestly, if the UFC is going to phone it in as hard as they are with this weekend's card, I'm going to cover their competitor. And if you're thinking Bellator, no. I'm talking about their real competitor. Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. It's this weekend. It's the 17th. It's lighting up the internet. It's the biggest fight of our age. And it stands to be a good laugh. It seems some really weird takes on this. I mean, the reason that Jake Paul has decided to do this is the same reason that he decided to do the Nate Robinson one. He's picked a guy who... It's exactly the same thing playing out. People who follow Ben Askren's wrestling career or MMA career or like wrestling or like MMA are now like, yeah, but this is an athlete we're talking about. And you're going, well, Nate Robinson was also an athlete. There are types of athlete. And Ben Askren is not the type of athlete who punches well or slips punches well. And if I sound really... before I get into it really, I am a big Ben Askren fan. Own all his instructionals, watched all his fights, was very intrigued by him coming to the UFC. And I think I've said before how much I admire him for just, not being scared of losing at all. He can go out there and get starched and just be like, yeah, well, that happened. Or like the Jordan Burroughs thing that I mentioned a couple of podcasts back. He did a pay-per-view event with Jordan Burroughs, and he had to know he was going to get ragdolled because they trained together, and he'd been out of the gate, he'd been out of wrestling for 10 years or something at that point. He knew what Jordan Burroughs would do against him, and he went in there and raised a ton of money for USA Wrestling, whatever it is, just because he could. Seems like a good guy like that. And I don't know about Ben Askren. He could be serious about knocking Jake Paul out. He could really think he's going to do it. Or he could be coming into this being like, yeah, well, I'll give it a shot. And if I lose, I will spend all these children's money on cryptocurrency. But the main reason I'm so pessimistic is, aside from just how hittable Askren was through his entire career when he wasn't on a single leg, and, how he doesn't really have any pop in his punches, and they're pretty slow, so he doesn't really have a way of keeping a guy off him. The main thing that's standing out to me is that when Ben Askren retired, it was because he needed a hip replacement. And I've read a load of different articles reporting that he then didn't get the hip replacement. They found an alternative surgery. And there was another one where he had I think he ended up having the head of his, is it femur, where it slots into your acetabulum? Whatever, this isn't an anatomy podcast, but they file off the top of your hip and they cap it. And they spray non-stick cooking spray around the inside of your hip joint, but he had some kind of surgical intervention on his hips. And the reason that I'm thinking about that so clearly is that I just watched a load of his instructionals on BJJ Fanatics, and shout out to them for being boys and giving me all those free instructionals. And in several of them, they seem to be filmed in different time periods, but in several of them, he goes, his brother Max is going to demonstrate this because my hip's acting up. And if you can't do the thing that you're best at because your hip's acting up, I don't have a whole lot of faith that you're going to be able to slip punches, throw with power, and move well on that hip. Even at the end of his UFC career, he'd be coming in for the weigh-ins and walking up to the dude like he was wearing a nappy. It was really weird. The guy couldn't walk properly because you get ground down by years of wrestling. And particularly the funk stuff, because he's famous for being a funky wrestler. Funk is instead of trying your damnedest to stop a takedown, you grab their leg and roll underneath them and come up with it, and other weird shit like that. But it's really, really hard on the hips and knees, and you're seeing it a lot in the current generation of wrestling. Guy just won a tournament with both his ACLs blown out in the course of that tournament at a couple of weeks ago. But it's very, very hard on your lower extremities, the modern wrestling sort of meta. And Ben was a large part of bringing that in. But then if we talk about Jake Paul's boxing itself, I was asked to write about this stuff for Unibet and Vice Sports and so on. all the YouTuber boxing stuff, and honestly, it is bollocks. I mean, it's nice that it's bringing in views for, proper boxers. Was it Billy Joe Saunders? Was on not the undercard, but he was like the co-main event of one of these KSW Logan Paul fights. But it's always been the case. People will always care more about watching celebrities fight. Or do you reckon Mickey Rourke could actually fight instead of like, trained fighter, who's the best in the world? Did I say KSW last time? I meant KSI. KSW is a Polish MMA organization, which is good. But yeah, the KSI Logan Paul fights were trash. And like it was interesting watching them and just being like, what are these guys doing? And then on the undercard of like their first fight, or was it the KSI Weller fight or whatever it was, there was a Jake Paul fight against the younger brother of KSI who's like half his size. And then he fought some other guy called Jib, and then he was going to fight Nate Robinson. And honestly, watching through those fights, it was surprising that Jake Paul can actually box a bit. Not a whole lot, but better than KSI and Logan Paul. And he's worked out how to use his jab, and he does this thing a lot. I mean, you saw it really stand out in the Nate Robinson one, but he was doing it in the Jib fight too. But he will jab, and then he will drop back and either lower his head underneath his opponent to like butt them or enter a clinch and duck under their punches, or swing the overhand across the top. It's the jab, fall away, duck in. It's an application of the old jab and duck, which we're always talking about with Roberto Duran, or jab and dip. But it works really well, especially against these kind of guys who are going to chase you back. Now, there's a whole heap of problems with Jake Paul's boxing. His left hook isn't really anything because he stands so side on a lot of the time. And while he is side on a lot of the time, he's not that great at getting down behind his lead shoulder. When he is, almost at every point in his fights, he is open for the left hook. Even like Nate Robinson running at him, flailing, caught him with a number of left hooks. But that drop away overhand right, I really like. The ducking into the clinch or ducking in to smother his opponent's offense is a nice shout. And the other thing that I really like about him, like from his earliest fights, and I don't know if this is from working with Logan, who was an accomplished wrestler, or decently accomplished wrestler, not like NCAA champ or anything, but a good wrestler. Jake Paul seems to know that if you stick your head in the middle of the guy's chest or underneath his face, he can't tie you up. And he was doing that against, what's his name, Deji? The first guy he fought. The guy kept trying to clinch him and he just put his head in the middle of his chest, freed his hands and started banging. And that is a surprisingly rare skill even at the top levels of boxing. I was doing some stuff on Miguel Cotto this week, which I haven't finished or released yet. But Miguel Cotto gave Floyd Mayweather one of his best fights, like in his prime. And one of the reasons is that even guys like Manny Pacquiao, when Floyd clinched them, they'd just go, "Oh, that's the end of that," and then they'd wait for the referee to break them. And part of that is like Kenny Bayless reffing, who's fucking awful. If guys come together, he goes, "Stop," and then breaks them. But with a good ref and knowledge, the old Ty Cruz secret. God, we're hitting all the YouTube memes today. But Cotto was able to continually break free his hands and start working from the inside, and a lot of that is head position. If you watch his fights, like when he went up to middleweight towards the end of his career, like is it Kanagai, second last guy he fought, guys keep trying to like snap him down and lean on him, and he makes sure to like even pick them up instead. He'll stand up underneath them and pick them off the floor to stop them pulling his head down. And this is where like every time there's an MMA versus boxer fight or rumors of, we do get to talk about how like wrestling is a part of boxing. It's just not appreciated. Like Floyd Mayweather, amazing wrestling in boxing. Always pulling guys' heads down, leaning on them, letting them come up on the elbow side and cracking them in the head when they do so. Tying up, just, you instead of slipping 2 or 3 punches in a row, slip one and then move in on the guy and tie him up, and then you don't have to worry about it. And that was a constant feature of Floyd Mayweather's career. And when Tyson Fury beat Deontay Wilder, I think it's the other year at this point, but the second fight between Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury comes in heavier, leans on the back of his head constantly. It is exhausting. So yeah, it would be really cool if Ben Askren came in and folded Jake Paul in half. But again, you're dealing with like referees. It is entirely up to the referee how much you get to work in clinches and hold. And the last one I watched of Jake Paul's, the Nate Robinson one, the referee was really like, stop wrestling at every point. But then I suppose this links in with like the other big MMA versus boxing story of this week, which is basically what I predicted as soon as Francis Ngannou won the title. It happened even quicker than I expected, but just bollocks about Francis Ngannou fighting Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua. You know, exact same shit as when Junior Dos Santos won the belt, and it was immediately, I think I'd have a good chance against Vladimir Klitschko. I compiled a thread of the best responses to Francis Ngannou saying that he'd fight Tyson Fury, and there are truly some amazing ones. In fact, I think it's dramatic reading time. Remember, Francis started boxing and transitioned into UFC. Only a few years training in the MMA. I think it would be a tight game if they boxed, but Francis will drop Tyson if he lands at least 2 heavy punches. Another guy responds to Francis, you can literally kill him, champ. MMA stamina, intelligence, and pain is lighting years ahead of boxing. Judging from his poor boxing pedigree, brackets, fighting only bums, I don't believe he will ever step in the octagon. Same man responds in an argument, you kidding me? Everyone who has tried both disciplines knows that MMA comparing to boxing is what geometry, brackets, highly complex maths, is to basic math. You want to convince me the guy who lost because he was wearing junkie costume and who was fought only bums can beat Francis? Mate, are you joking? And then in the interest of portraying both sides, someone snapped back. And you do realise when Francis lost to Stripe, when Francis lost to Stripe only had one eye. Laughing face. Like literally, he's missing his whole eye. It's a fake eyeball. So you mean to tell me he lost versus a guy with one eye that's smaller than the heavyweight champion? This is a man who has seen a video of Michael Bisping taking out his eye and gone, damn, can't believe that happened to Stipe. Also, I can't believe Stipe's weird accent. I'm enjoying these too much, but Francis would excel in a boxing match where he only has to worry about the hands. He has proper technique to mock mofos into orbit. I like Tyson Fury, but Francis wins this by beheading 10 out of 10. Fury would have a better chance in the octagon for survival. In boxing, he dead. GIF of the Predator. And then my final one. No way Wilder hits as hard as Francis. Plus, Francis has boxing fundamentals, which is something Wilder lacks entirely. Oh, it's a very silly business. But then that's combat sports generally. Francis Ngannou, like, come on. The man's never thrown more than 60 punches in a fight. He gassed out hard in the first Stipe fight when he was made to work. He surprised Stipe with some better wrestling the second time round. But no, I can't see him making the distance with someone like Andy Ruiz or Joe Joyce jabbing his face off, let alone, the world heavyweight champion. But anyway, back to Askren, Paul. I suspect Jake Paul's probably going to fairly handily win this because he has, the speed and the power. And Askren, again, hip replacement. However, I have seen Askren work in the left hook on the bag. That might be because he literally can't move his feet. But he did, look pretty decent. I mean, the left hook is a big issue for Paul. If you're just going to take his right hand and then throw the left hook back, that's probably as good a strategy as any. I think the left hook is something that could be a killer for any of these YouTube boxers. They all come in like trying to jab and throw right straights or the odd overhand, but they're all like the right hand leaving the chin is the thing that probably takes the longest to drill into someone. Keeping the right hand there, throwing the right hand, keeping it short, getting it back as fast as possible. Those are pretty, that takes time to ingrain in someone. And the more you want to swing hard while you're there in front of the crowd, well ahead of when you should be, the more you open yourself up to counter punches. But anyway, that's the YouTube boxing section of our show over. Come back in if you've closed the window. What we got going on this weekend MMA wise? I mean, the big fight is Kelvin Gaslin versus Robert Whitaker. That was something that was booked, is it 2 years ago now? They were supposed to, well, maybe 3. They were supposed to fight when Robert was the world middleweight champion. That fell through. You had Gaslin versus Adesanya for an interim belt. Whitaker, aside from that performance against Adesanya, has looked largely faultless. He took on Darren Till, completely shut him down. Jared Cannonier, he got hurt in the last minute of the fight, I think it was. But for the most part, Jared Cannonier had looked incredible in his middleweight run, and Rob Whitaker came in and just made him look like he didn't have anything. Really nice jabs, use of the 1-2, the old 1-2 high kick, the Whitaker special, and he even sprinkled in the odd takedown, which we really like. I'd love to see him. I'd love to see him use it more because he's got such a well-rounded skill set, and yet he doesn't force the point as a takedown artist very often. Might not be the fight to do though, because Kelvin Gaslin is so funky on the ground. Kelvin Gaslin just picked up his second win since 2018. Very odd character. He fought basically. This is partly because the division was so old, but he came in and he fought average age of 38. Johnny Hendricks, Tim Kennedy, Vitor Belfort, Chris Weidman, Michael Bisping, Jacare. And that earned him a title shot, but then the Israel Adesanya fight happened instead. Lost that one. Lost to Darren Till, which is basically that fight is the reason that people regard Darren Till highly still. Because Till did a really good job in that one, actually. And then Jack Hermanson heel hooked him in under 2 minutes, which was very, very strange. But he's just fought Ian Heinisch in a really good back and forth fight. If you haven't seen that one, definitely worth a watch. And Heinisch surprised him by coming out and wrestling early, and then Gastelum surprised Heinisch by going to his wrestling so much throughout. If you want to know about Kelvin, all you really need to know is wicked fast southpaw 1-2, generally really good conditioning, and if you take him down, he's going to arm roll you and end up on top. If you watch his fight, his fight with Tim Kennedy, Kennedy had held down some really good fighters like Michael Bisping, he laid all over. And Kelvin Gastelum is just a chubbed up welterweight, really. And Kennedy keeps taking him down, and Gastelum just keeps quad podding up or rolling through and being like, nah, mate, and then turning back in to face him. And Tim Kennedy very quickly gasses out. And that's a Kelvin Gastelum strength, even though his gas tank might not be the best in the division, he's very good at driving a pace on people and wilting them. Or certainly was with those old men. Meanwhile, Whitaker obviously came into the game getting, he was known for his fantastic wallop, had a great left hook. Again, like Gastelum, went up to middleweight, and really more an all-rounder now. But in the last couple, he's been sort of stripping it back, very much 1s and 2s. But then he's trying to keep himself safe. He's trying to not eat those big counter left hooks that he did against Yoel Romero and Israel Adesanya. Yeah, he's coming along. It's just that he's basically fought himself back into a title shot almost, and you haven't seen that much change. Intrigued to see where it goes, though. I think this is one really where Rob could benefit from kicking a lot. Does some fantastic work with his front kicks when he wants to. He really teed off on Yoel Romero with front kicks through both their fights, and it was a great way of stopping Yoel Romero from bursting in on him because of his incredible speed, and that's something that you have to deal with Kelvin Gastelum. He's going to come in on you quick with those 1s and 2s and the 3-2, the slappy right hook to left straight. I think those sort of techniques, jamming techniques, are a great shout against Gastelum. Things like the low line side kick, which again Whitaker big fan of. I think the danger for Whitaker here is when he throws his right straight or when he throws his right straight or commits on a big lancing jab and misses, or Gaslin takes it and comes back. It's going to be on the return that he's probably going to be in the most danger. So it'll be interesting to see if he can, throw his punches and stick to Gastelum, just take away those chances to come back. But it was a good fight when they booked it the first time, and it's a good fight now. And if you want to hear more about that, I wrote an article for Unibet 2 years ago when they booked it the first time. Probably worth a look. But while that's a good fight, the rest of this card is a bunch of trash. Co-main event, Draco Close, anyone? Draco Close versus Jeremy Stephens. That is a fight where Jeremy Stephens should be able to get the knockout. He doesn't get them often, but often he's fighting guys who are on the cusp of the top 10 and should be good enough to work him out. Draco Close, I don't have that faith in him. Luis Pena's fighting some guy who's 115th in the world. Ricardo Ramos is there against Bill Algeo, the casino from Ocean's 11. Ricardo Ramos, in his last one, he was throwing, is it a Ratazenga kick where you cross your legs across each other and you kick behind your own leg at the opponent's lead leg? And Anderson Silva did it once. Conor McGregor did it once. neither of them did anything useful with it. Ricardo Ramos, it was the only thing he threw like 3 rounds of his last fight. You got Abdul Razak Al Hassan fighting a guy with 4 fights. You got Andrei Arlovsky on the main fucking card against Chase Sherman. As someone said on my Twitter, the fight to decide who gets cut a second time. You got the return of Gerald Meerschaert. You got Tracy Cortez, who I only know because people are so thirsty for her, against Justine Kish, who, fairly or not, is going to be known as the woman who pooed herself in the cage. And then you got the only other good fight on this card. Oh, my boy Austin Hubbard's down there against Dakota Bush, which is a great porn name. But the only other fight I really care about on this card, Alexander Romanov versus the spurious Spaniard, Juan Espino. Actually, both these lads, good grapplers in a division full of shit grapplers. Like, when you watch both of them, Juan Espino always, like, taking guys down, looking for that Habib-style far wrist ride, dragging guys down on that. Smothering top control. Romanov, same thing. Suplexed what's his name? Rocky Martinez? Forget his name, but he suplexed him, which was fucking awesome because they, like, the combined weight of them was like 600 pounds. But like, these guys benefit so much from just the shoddy state of things in the heavyweight division. Like, Romanov's last fight, he fought Marcos Ruggiero de Lima and submitted him with a forearm choke from side control, which if you're struggling to picture what that is, it's literally put your hand across the opponent's throat, grabbing their lat and just pulling your elbow down. And I feel like if you get caught in that in the UFC, you should at least pretend to go unconscious. You shouldn't allow yourself to tap to that. Just my personal opinion, but it's really embarrassing. It basically, both these guys benefit from the fact that heavyweights can't get up. You know, it's things get exponentially worse as you go up in weight. Part of the reason that the flyweights are so scrambly, if you cut to 125 pounds and the opponent's cut to 125 pounds, you pop your hips when they're in mount, they're going to go fucking flying. You know, you can do all those cool escapes and scrambles and stuff. Whereas once you get to 265 pounds, or guys who are cutting to 265, like Espino and Romanov and a lot of their opponents, basically once you're on top of someone, they can't get up. It just doesn't happen. If you watch Overeem versus Sakai, he gets him to the leg drag and he starts beating him, expecting him to turn away, and Sakai just can't turn. Like, Overeem's kneeling on one of his thighs and he's like, oh no, can't get up. So Overeem just batters him there. But then for every one of those examples, there's a Derek Lewis. So who the fuck knows? But, you know, this one has the chances of being a fun grappling match. I would suspect whoever gets on top wins, but more likely you're going to have a weird kickboxing match. Then in Bellator, you got a couple of interesting fights. You got, headlined by Vadim Nemakov versus Phil Davis. Nemakov, really interesting guy. I'm going to say it, I'm sorry, but Fedor's protege, which is something that people have said about everyone who is tangentially related to Fedor since Fedor became famous. It used to be, like, the one that they used to pin all their hopes on was Kirill. What was his name? Kirill? Doesn't even matter. Just look up Kirill Fedor. But Kirill was Fedor's closest training partner, which basically meant, you know, instead of being like a second Fedor, you know, because surely iron sharpens iron, and to make a Fedor you need another Fedor. No, he's just a punching bag who happened to be friends with Fedor and Alex since they were kids. And then finally, like, he came to the US, lost to Paulo Buentello in 2007 or whatever, and then finally came back after going undefeated in sketchy Russian promotions. Came back 2 years ago to Bellator, got smoked in like the first minute. And he got really, really fat too. He's like a heavyweight Gaslin. However, Nemakov, actually part of Team Fedor, actually pretty good. Most recently knocked out Ryan Bader, which was a real step up in competition, because he'd been beating up people like Liam McGeary, but there's Liam McGeary and then there's Ryan Bader, and Ryan Bader was top of the heap there. Title fight, obviously, so he won the belt. I think he head kicked him. Can't remember what happened in that one, but he basically... Bader looked really hopeless. I remember that much. He's taking on Phil Davis in a rematch of an unremarkable split decision back in 2018. This is part of the tournament before the title, because that's the way these Bellator tournaments work. Every fight is for the title. You could see Phil Davis put on a wrestling clinic like we all hope he will in every one of his fights, or you could see him tepidly try and strike. Probably more likely. Feel like that's what happened in his last one against Lyoto Machida. Then your co-main event is Bellator's number 10 pound for pound in their official rankings, Corey Anderson, versus Yagshimuradov, who, he caught my eye because he waxed my boy Batraz Agneyev when Agneyev was undefeated. But a guy who's been around the the Russian scene for a very long time, and now he's ready for the regional scene. So, that could be all right. I think they thought they're giving Anderson a bye there. I mean, the Bellator rankings are the funniest thing in the world because not only have they got Corey Anderson at number 10 pound for pound, they also have Fat Melvin Manhoff in the top 10 at light heavyweight. So, pretty incredible. Paul Daly's back against Tomasi. Okay. Julia Budd, who was part of my parlay the other week, so I'm still waiting on that to pay off, is fighting some 9-5 lass. And Raymond Daniels is back to kick another dude in the balls and then give another creepy press conference where he gives thanks to God for the no contest. Oh, and Pedro Cavallo's back, so he'll try and pressure someone, which will be fun. Oh, and shit, the very first fight on the card is Saul Rogers versus Mads Bennell. Saul Rogers, you'll remember from, or you might not remember, from beating Ryan Hall on Tough. I believe the sole loss that Ryan Hall has had in MMA, like professional, amateur, exhibition, whatever. And Mads Bennell, probably the best featherweight outside the UFC. I'll just let the Pitbull fans get really angry there. No, Mads Bennell had a great fight with Arnold Allen, made him look rubbish for 2 rounds, and then sort of threw his head into a ninja choke. But the king of the Japanese necktie, and has some really funky boxing. So honestly, that's the best fight on the card. I'm gonna watch the first one and then close my computer for the rest. And then there was something else going on. One is doing their second show on TNT. Not a lot on it at the moment, but you've got Christian Lee is going to be fighting Timothy Nastyukin, or Tim Nasty as we call him, in a title fight for I think it's their 170 belt, which might be welterweight, might be lightweight. Can never remember with one, but. Yeah, I mean, Christian Lee, I described him the other week as like the bad guy, the East German bad guy in a sports film, because he's like him and Angela are both like this. They're better than everyone they fight, but they'll cheat anyway. It's a perfect heel move. Whereas Tim Nasty, Tiger Muay Thai guy, obviously teammate of Petr Yan, which is very cool. But most recently beat Peter Buist, but you'll remember him from knocking out Eddie Alvarez in Eddie's one debut. 2 things to watch for. 1, the fight itself, because they're both awesome fighters. And 2, how often Christian Lee is able to foul him and get away with it. Literally, watch Christian Lee's fight with Shinya Aoki in the ring, where he uses the classic, and now this is Fedor's protege shit, when the guy tries to take you down, put your elbow over the rope, so that your armpit is holding the rope and holding you up. But you can be like, oh no, I'm just caught up in it. Oh well, never mind. Now the takedown's not worked. We'll just break, a Fedor classic. But literally, I've never seen anyone docked a point for that in the ring. You could just do it freely forever. Anyway, I reckon that'll do us for today because, bollocks going on this weekend. Weird ass cards. But I'm going to do something fun for the Patreon boys in the next couple of days. Working on my audio setup at the moment. Let me know what you feel needs doing, especially if you've got audio experience. And if you want to get in on the extra episodes and extra articles we do for the Patreon boys, and we're having a storming few weeks of content for them, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast. If you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Smoking Ben Askren's left hook bless.